In July 1944, representatives from 44 nations gathered in a small New Hampshire town to solve a problem that had just destroyed the global economy. Nobody trusted anybody's money anymore. Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, a mountain resort hotel. The war in Europe was still grinding through its final year. The Pacific campaign hadn't ended, but the Allied planners already knew what came next. The old system was dead. Gold standards had failed. Currency exchanges had become weapons. Nations had defaulted on debts. The machinery of global trade had seized up. Something had to replace it. The delegation included John Maynard Keynes, the most influential economist alive. Harry Dexter White led the American team. They brought with them competing visions of how the world economy should work. Both agreed on one thing: the chaos had to end. What they built would reshape global finance for 3 decades, and then it would collapse spectacularly. Before 1944, the gold standard ruled. A nation's currency was worth whatever gold backed it. Sounds simple, it wasn't. When trade ran uneven, when one country owed another more than it could pay, the only solution was to ship gold across the ocean. This made international commerce glacial. It made recessions brutal. A country that lost gold couldn't print money to stimulate its economy. It had to contract, deflate, watch unemployment rise. The Great Depression had exposed the system's fatal flaw. When American demand collapsed in 1929, the rest of the world couldn't adjust. Countries couldn't devalue their currencies to make exports cheaper. They couldn't borrow to smooth the shock. The gold standard locked them in place. By the early 1930s, nations started abandoning it in desperation. Trade volumes fell by half. Unemployment soared. The system that was supposed to bring stability had guaranteed catastrophe. The Bretton Woods architects wanted flexibility without chaos. Keynes proposed an international currency, a neutral unit that no single nation controlled. White pushed back. America had emerged from the war with most of the world's gold. He wanted the dollar to be the anchor. The compromise: currencies would be pegged to the dollar. The dollar would be pegged to gold at a fixed rate, $35 per ounce. Everything else flowed from that single number. This created a hierarchy. The dollar sat at the top. All other currencies orbited around it, their values fixed by treaty. If the British pound needed to change value, it couldn't just happen. Governments had to negotiate. The International Monetary Fund, a new institution born at Bretton Woods, would oversee the system and lend money to nations in crisis. It was elegant on paper. It assumed one thing: that America would always have enough gold to back the dollars in circulation. For 15 years it worked. Trade recovered. Europe rebuilt. Japan industrialized. The system gave nations predictability. They knew what their money was worth tomorrow. They could plan investments. Banks could settle transactions without panic. The post-war boom wasn't inevitable. Bretton Woods made it possible. But the system carried a hidden timer. As the world economy grew, nations needed more dollars to conduct trade. America had to export dollars. It did this by running deficits, spending more abroad than it earned. At first, this seemed fine. America was printing money. The world wanted dollars. Everyone was happy. By the 1960s, the math broke down. America had printed far more dollars than it had gold to back them. Foreign central banks noticed. They started asking, where's the gold? If everyone tried to redeem their dollars for gold at once, America would run dry. The promise that had anchored the entire system was becoming impossible to keep. President Johnson tried to manage the crisis quietly. He asked other nations to stop redeeming dollars. Some complied, others didn't. France under de Gaulle demanded gold. It was a political statement: French independence from American financial dominance. By 1968, a run on American gold was underway. The London Gold Pool, an agreement among central banks to stabilize the price, collapsed. August 15, 1971, President Nixon made a decision that would shatter Bretton Woods. He announced that America would no longer convert dollars to gold. The link was broken. Overnight, the system that had governed global finance for 27 years became obsolete. Currencies that had been pegged for decades were suddenly floating. Nobody knew what their money was worth anymore. The collapse wasn't sudden failure, it was slow suffocation. The system worked as long as the world trusted America's promise. Once that trust fractured, once it became clear the promise couldn't be kept, the structure couldn't survive. Bretton Woods had solved the 1930s problem. It couldn't solve the 1960s problem: an empire spending beyond its means. What came after was chaos for a few years. Currencies swung wildly, inflation spiked, oil prices quadrupled, but something unexpected happened: the world adapted. Floating currencies meant nations could adjust. Trade didn't collapse, it grew. The dollar lost its throne but remained the dominant reserve currency. The IMF survived and evolved. The system that replaced Bretton Woods was less rigid. It was also more resilient. Bretton Woods teaches a lesson that keeps repeating. Systems designed to solve yesterday's problems often create tomorrow's. The architects in New Hampshire were brilliant. They understood what had gone wrong in the 1930s, but they couldn't account for economic growth that would outpace their assumptions. They couldn't prevent the nation at the center of the system from spending unsustainably. No system can police itself. The most important thing Bretton Woods gave the world wasn't the dollar standard. It was the idea that the global economy could be governed by rules, not by power alone, not by the whims of whoever had the most gold. The system failed, but the principle survived. Every international financial agreement since has tried to build on that foundation. Today's financial system is decentralized, flexible, and fragile in different ways. Cryptocurrencies promise a new kind of trustless money. Central bank digital currencies suggest a return to control. But none of these conversations happen without the shadow of Bretton Woods. The architects proved something crucial. The way we organize money shapes everything else. How we trade, how we grow, how we trust each other across borders. The system lasted less than 3 decades, long enough to rebuild the world after its most destructive war, long enough to prove that global cooperation was possible, not long enough to be permanent. Nothing in economics is, but for those 27 years it held, and that changed everything. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe for more economic history. Each week we trace how the systems that govern money and power came to be, and why they fell apart. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.